Hi folks, thanks for your time today. I appreciate you all coming along. I'm going to be chatting a little bit about the BBC's web design system today. But before we get into the design system side of things, here's my embarrassing photo of my garden fence. So I think you'll all agree, looking at it, it's just a little bit wonky, isn't it? My mum would say it's feeling squiffy. So when we moved into our house, we didn't know what that big bush at the back was. So we didn't have any documentation about what was going on with the garden and the plant at the back. So we kind of left it and left the fence alone and left the garden alone to kind of redo the inside of the house first. And then our neighbours decided that they needed to nail their garden furniture to that same fence as well, that the plant was kind of climbing up and depending on. And they didn't really chat to us about that. They are absolutely lovely, love them to bits. But we didn't communicate very much about our shared fence, our shared garden component, if you will. So then later on, they decided, actually, we want to change our furniture again, and we're gonna remove all the nails out of there. And then that's when we started to see the sort of slightly drunken lean on the fence because it hadn't been maintained very well either. And that was on both of us. And we weren't chatting about it. And then the fence started to depend on the bush for survival. So now, if I want to go ahead and fix any of that, because we didn't have any of our documentation, communication, no clear ownership and no maintenance of the garden nor the fence, it's going to cost me a lot of money in the summer to fix it all at once, because if I try to take the fence out, the bush is going to hold on to it, and if I try to take the bush out first, then the fence will probably fall over into the garden. So it's all at once, unfortunately. So hopefully, as we go through our talk today, we'll figure out how to not let our design systems end up like my garden fence. Little introduction first. So hi, I'm Sophie. I manage a whole bunch of amazing software engineering folks who are building the common web foundations for the vast majority of the BBC website. I come from a software engineering background generally, so I've been in the BBC for, it's coming up for about 10 years now, goodness, part of the furniture. But I did a lot of accessibility work. That was kind of my specialism as I went into the kind of senior and principal roles. And I, as Sarah's nicely mentioned, thank you very much, founded the BBC's first dedicated web design system team. And I'm currently acting as the engineering manager for that wider space too. So before we get into the actual design system itself, I want to give you an idea of the kind of scale that we're talking about when we're talking about the BBC. So I checked these numbers very recently. So this, the website that we have, unlike my garden fence, which scales to exactly 2 households, the BBC website serves far more than that. So these numbers are a 30-day sum period in January this year. So we receive, for the pages that our design system serves, 4.8 billion requests, which is absolutely wild. And of those 4.8 billion, our presentation Lambda rendered 3.9 billion times, which is, incredible, right? That scale is huge. And on the kind of product side of things and the services that we support as well. So lots and lots of brands across the BBC website. If you've ever used the site, you'll know that we serve lots of different audiences across the UK. We have currently 10 brands supported by the design system with about 25 capability teams, so cross-discipline engineering teams working and contributing to that system. And there's been, when I checked last, 450 contributors to our mono repo where we keep most of this code, which is amazing. In terms of frequency of release numbers, last month we deployed 285 times, which is pretty impressive. So lots of very awesome software engineers contributing to this system. Really quick fire on the tech stack. If folks want to chat to me afterwards about the ins and outs of what we use in our CI and stuff like that, more than happy to. But our app currently runs on what we call the presentation Lambda. We have a React front end with our own web framework that renders all of our pages, and all of that then hooks up to a business logic layer, and then onward to many, many upstream content APIs and information from our editorial staff. Our code lives in GitHub, and you'll probably hear and read the word WebCore throughout this presentation. That's just our internal name for the web platform that we've created that uses all of this aforementioned tech. For our design system specifically, Storybook is kind of our front door. Our design system really evolved from the code implementation rather than from a UX kind of perspective, although we do reflect the components in the implemented system in Figma as well, so that folks can access it there and update all of the docs. We treat Storybook like our Argos catalog of components and containers, if you will. The system is not versioned, which is really interesting. So when you merge something into the WebCore platform or to the design system, it goes live, and that is the source of truth then for everyone who's then using that system. And because of that, we lean fairly heavily on Chromatic for visual regression testing across the repo when people are raising PRs, so that you know if you're impacting kind of other people's code. So the design system team themselves came up with this mission statement, and I was there when this was created. So through inclusive thinking and collaboration, the design system enables others to create accessible, consistent, and scalable user experience with audience value at their core. And that audience value is really important for the BBC specifically, because we're trying to get that best value possible to our license fee payers. I think this puts front and center what the team are trying to achieve. And the way that we run the system is a little bit unique and interesting. So we have a kind of federated contribution model. So people in the teams can kind of contribute whatever they want to the design system. And most of the things that are on the website are in the design system. Some are more reused than others, and we kind of decided that that was fine. And then the design system team themselves kind of sit as a central kind of expert team that kind of garden the system, if you will. They kind of keep everything kind of running and make sure that when people are contributing to the system, they are following guidance that means that we're benefiting the system and what the business needs are, as well as them meeting their requirements. So that team have a lot of cross-cutting understanding and expertise over particular problem spaces like accessibility and reusable solutions specifically, and they've made themselves experts in contributing to the system. A lot of the people in that team have either built on the system previously in one of the capability teams, or they've had experience of design systems outside of the BBC. What's really important about this, I think, is that it talks about enabling others. So the system is really only as good as the successful outcomes that it enables. So it would, you can have this perfect design system that's like, super not messy and it's really tidy, but if no one's using it and they're circumventing the kind of system that you've provided them, the purity probably isn't worth it, right? So how does this work in practice? So we're going to look at it from the perspective today of a team trying to build part of their experience on our system. So we're going to put some children's web team shoes on today, and they are very nice, bright and yellow. So we've got, we're a team of folks in the kind of children's web team, and we are trying to bring our brand, our CBBC brand, and probably later CBeebies as well, into the system. So we're going to start by onboarding. So as we approach the system for the first time, the first thing that we'll probably notice is that we've put a lot of deliberate effort into the onboarding process for that system. They've made it really clear up front what's important to know about the system before you start contributing to it. This is on our front office, so Storybook. So we've added a lot of documentation that we've kind of hand-rolled in the Storybook tool. So even if the people who are in the children's team, so in the team that we're currently putting ourselves in the shoes of, have never interacted with the design system before, we've got an onboarding path for you. And every discipline in that team can come and understand what the design system is, what it's supposed to do, what it expects from you. And then if you're maybe an experienced developer even, there's pathways that you can kind of dive right in. So if, say here you wanted to go straight into the theming side of things, then you can do that. But we do also have that kind of whole hub of information that we've created to help guide you. And it's also really good for onboarding third-party teams that we're working with, right? So we've been working with a lot of third-party folks recently that are helping us build our experiences, and this has been super useful. And this helps us scale, right? Because we can send this documentation out, and it's super self-service to begin with. If you are more about that face-to-face experience, though, the team do run quarterly onboarding sessions, and then they record the last one that was done, so that if you really want that kind of like human explanation from the team, the design system team themselves, you do have access to that, or you can come along to one of the actual sessions. But I think that one quarterly meeting to onboard anyone to a design system this big is pretty good going, and is a good way to kind of scale that system. It's made super clear, like I said earlier, what we're trying to achieve with the system just in the plain docs as well. If you want to just go read through docs and that's more your bag, that's totally fine. It's clear to us as we kind of like, if we're thinking about the children's team coming on board, that when we look to solve problems with this system, reusing things and solving common problems once is the way that we're probably going to be entering that system and wanting to work. We even go a little bit further and take it to the next level. So if you're someone from, say, the product or UX discipline or even the delivery discipline, you can come in and we've got this kind of like Figma flow chart, which can help you with your decision making, right? So as you come into the system, it'll kind of help you understand what are you actually trying to achieve, and then guide you down a path of either reuse, or you need to add something to a component, or you need to talk to the design system team because you need something brand new altogether, which is totally fine. UX is very often embedded in our teams that are working on this system, so having something like this that's more accessible for that discipline is really useful and helpful. And then finally, you are going to get that introduction to the design system community, and I think that this is super, super special about our design system. So all of those 25 capability teams that I mentioned earlier are onboarding to a community that they know they have full access to. That includes the design system team themselves, but they also know that there's all of these support channels. We've got Slack channels, we've got community meetings, and we really do treat it like a community of teams who are trying to build that like one BBC experience, right? We're all trying to solve problems, and some of them are similar, and we might be able to come together and come up with a common solution. So just to recap that a little bit there, we've got flexible entry points and onboarding. So up front, we've seen what the expectations are on our team as we build on this system, but we also understand how we can contribute successfully, and it's through paths and at a time that kind of suits the needs of the people in the team. So you might have someone who's, I just want to read docs. I don't want to have to talk to anyone, which is totally fine. I think we've all met developers like that, which is great. But if you really want that kind of like human interaction, and you really want folks to be reassuring you about your decision making, if that's what you're looking for, then the team are there for you, and the other teams building on the system are there too, so you can go and speak to people who've done this before. But our expectations are really clear as well, right? We know from reading all those docs that when we do contact the design system team, they are probably going to be asking us to reuse things. They're going to be questioning our approach, and they're going to be encouraging us to be thinking about the things that are important to them in the business, like accessibility and performance and efficiency. So remembering again, we're in those CVVC children's web team shoes. How are we going to add our own flavor into the system whilst also making sure that it's reusable, maintainable, and scalable for later? Well, as we go through the onboarding docs, we learn about our design system's levers system. So this is using a few layers of tokens. So I've seen design systems before where you've kind of got that first layer of tokens where you kind of name the hex codes and you map them. And we've got a kind of an extra layer on top of that and made tokens where the tokens represent what you're trying to achieve, not just the color that you're picking. This keeps everything super consistent. Because you're thinking about that purpose, you can transfer the usages of those tokens between components really easily. And it doesn't matter which brand you're using. The decisions about color contrast and accessibility are kind of been made up front, and then you can kind of trust that those tokens are going to work together really nicely as you go from one component to the next. So we can go in and we can see in Storybook and check how the other brands are defining their colors, and how they've mapped their own service level tokens to use in the news lever, for example. So we do a lot of governance around these tokens and using them correctly, and we ask people to avoid using those raw kind of hex codes wherever possible in the system. So there's a little bit of governance there. So when new components come onto the system, the design system team do review them before they get into the code base, and they might kind of contact you and be a bit like, oh, it would be great if you could use the kind of token system properly and make sure that you've got your tokens well defined in your lever. Conversations about adding new tokens is completely fine, right? So again, we're not blocking people, we're gardening the system, we're asking folks to have a conversation. What are you trying to achieve here, and should this be a new thing that we add in? So they're kind of gardening as they go. And like I said, this makes all the components in the system completely transferable to another service or brand entirely. You'll notice that we've got like accent contrast there. So again, we're talking about accessibility and making sure that when you define these colors, you're thinking about where those things are going to be used and making sure that you're making accessible decisions for our audiences, which is super important to the system. But yeah, making sure that we're using these means that they can be safely reused across other features without worrying if your accessibility is going to work or not, but also that you're not going to be hunting down your hex codes in your components, kind of going, what did I set for that text over there again? So that's great. We can also play around with a nice bit of tooling about the way that the tokens sort of look when they're applied to realistic use cases. So again, this is all in Storybook. The design system team are an incredible group of engineers, and they've created some really cool tooling. So this really helps visualize, not just for engineers, but for anyone else who's approaching the system from another discipline. And they kind of want to see like, okay, cool, tokens, that's kind of going over my head. Like, what does it look like? How does it actually get applied? So this allows folks to kind of contextualize decision-making around the brand that we want to introduce in our children's shoes, if that makes sense. So you can kind of see an example here that we've got, that's what it looks like when you apply the news lever. So all those tokens we saw before, this is the kind of like applied version of that, with a cheeky little live in there as well, just for fun. We also have a similar system with the fonts. So we have palettes, font palettes that you can apply, again, at the same time as you defining that service lever for your page. In our page composition, you can also define the kind of the font palette that you want to use for that experience. And we probably want to be adding to this, right? Because as the children's web team, we want to be adding in probably a font that's a little bit more child-friendly, maybe a little bit more fun and round looking than the kind of, adult news, potentially slightly boring font. I love the Wreath font, by the way. It's very good. We paid someone to kind of make the font for us, and it is incredible. It's super accessible, and it's really, really nice. I love the branding there. And then kind of more classic design system stuff, we've got our kind of foundational values for spacing and breakpoints that we can use in our implementation later if we need to make anything new, so that our features look consistent across the entire site and align with the other services, again, to create that one BBC kind of like altogether nice, seamless kind of look. Okay, so CBBC, we're doing the brand. Amazing, we've got our colors into the system, right? So we've created our own lever for CBBC. We've thought about that accent and the accent contrast. We've thought about our accessibility. And we've also added that really nice kind of like more rounded, more playful looking font, which is wonderful. So to achieve that, we went through our well-documented scalable foundations, right? And that's kind of the super important part of a successful design system, I think, and being able to scale. The constraints and governance that we do have are clearly explained, and we know that when we're contributing to that system, that the design system team are probably going to be kind of, asking the right questions. But it's really easy to adhere to, but also to add to. And then that means that consistency really becomes part of the baseline of the experiences that you're building. And we also have that interactive documentation tooling to allow for visualization. So lots of different ways into that documentation again, but super, super clear what is expected of us and how to use those foundational elements of the system. So let's say that we want to create an index-like experience, right? So we call them the kind of like home pages of the brands, maybe indexes. So like the news front page on the BBC website, we would call the news index. So say we want to create something a little bit like that in our children's web space. A little bit like this one here we saw earlier in the palette playground with the new service lever applied. So what we'd really like to do is not only apply our colors here, but also add some maybe additional icons to the cards, so that we call promos in our system, to make it super obvious to our child audience the kind of content that they're going to be clicking through to. So let's dive in and have a look at how we might see about the details of one of those components. Very good. We've found the promo in Storybook. This component is probably one of the biggest that we have. It has a lot of options. You can do lots with this component. And there have been multiple conversations over the sort of 5 years or so that we've had this system building up about, do we break it down? Do we create a kind of like, zones within the promo? But yeah, very complicated component, but it works really well. And pretty much every promo that you see on the website, aside from a couple of exceptions, is using this one component, which is really, really cool. So it has a lot of control so that we can see what it does in Storybook, but let's take a look at that documentation. So yeah, we've added extra stuff into the kind of default Storybook documentation here. We've got lots of helpful information in there, so we can see when that component was last modified, when it was created, and we can also, importantly, see who owns it, right? So we know who we need to speak to, and we'll get onto that a little bit in a moment. So we're also noticing that we have this accessibility health check tooling, so that's pretty high up in the documentation, right? So I think, if we're going to be contributing to this component, we can see that accessibility is super important to the system because it's been hoisted up in that documentation. We're making it really clear that that's what we're kind of expecting from you. So we need to be thinking about that. What if we don't know much about accessibility? Oh, what do we do? So even when we haven't filled out our accessibility documentation yet, there's even links to more documentation and more instructions and help to help us understand how to meet the system's expectations. So we have this whole accessibility site that allows the teams to kind of go and understand how they should contribute to the system and how they're going to meet the expectations of that kind of health check in that documentation. And here's a nice example of some of our screen reader UX. So we ask for this in every new component that is on the system, especially the ones that are super, super reused, right? So something like the promo, really important that you understand how it works for our assistive technology users before you start going in and changing things, right? So we're very, very specific about having that kind of level of documentation. Ooh, this is super useful, right? So we can see that a little further down in the docs about the promo that it already has that icon kind of functionality that we were looking for, but it maybe just doesn't have our icons in it yet. So hopefully we'll be able to add those to the system and add it to kind of the various assets that we have access to, and we'll be able to meet that requirement that we were talking about earlier. And we can also see in that same documentation which tokens that promo is going to need and where it's going to be applying them in the component itself. So again, connecting all of those dots as we're going through and trying to add stuff in. We do also have our classic props tables, and although we do not have TypeScript everywhere in the in the repo, we do use TypeScript definition files alongside those components so that this can be auto-generated, right? And all of that documentation that we've just spoken about there is mostly automated, right? Aside from the kind of descriptions of what you're trying to achieve with that component when it's first built, all of that accessibility health stuff, all of the last modified, all of that, we've added that in as in automation and as tooling, and it's data-driven. So when you create a component, you can use a command line command for that, and it generates all of the files and metadata that you need alongside the component files and the story files. So you don't really need to work too hard to get all of that documentation in there, and all the accessibility stuff is kind of pre-populated. And it's really easy to then meet those documentation requirements because of that. And we did see those important behaviors hoisted up near the top of that doc. So we're back in the shoes. Ta-da! I definitely didn't take a screenshot of the existing CBBC website for this earlier, but yeah, we've got some promos in there, and we've got our colors in there as well. So this is kind of applying all of the things that we've added to that system. We've got our icons as well, which is great. Henry's looking very cute on there. Wonderful, love that. If anyone watches a bit of Blue Peter, so yeah. Everything in this implementation is reused. So when the team did actually, in real life, come in and implement their pages, they basically didn't have to build anything new at all. Even the layout of how this is called like the hierarchical promo collection component, right? So even the layout is componentized and reusable. So we've been able to use things that other people have created and just very gently tweak them and then apply our levers, and we've got most of a page, right? But what if we want something with a bit more oomph? So if you've been on the BBC News website and other pages, to be honest, because they're picking up this component a little bit more now, you've probably seen one of these gigantic billboards, and that's the name that we have for it in the system itself. They're usually used for huge, like, breaking news stories, and they have this kind of default brand ambience using the lever system, which works great for the existing core brands that we mentioned before. So we'd be able to put maybe like the CBBC purple into there, right? Editorial absolutely love this collection of components, right? It's very versatile, it's very eye-catching, it's very like high impact, right? So we can go into Storybook and we can kind of see, what if we put a bit of bluey in there? I love a bit of bluey. I don't know if anyone's got kids in the audience, but I don't, and I still watch it. So yeah, let's try seeing what it would look like if we use one of the simpler versions of the billboard. So we've not got those extra promos in there embedded, but we're still using that kind of like big canvas space with the kind of gradiented kind of overlay there on our brand image. And I mean, it looks all right, doesn't it? It looks okay, but it's a little bit not branded, right? So even if we use the kind of CBBC purple here, it doesn't necessarily go very well with the image that editorial have chosen for this brand. So it'd be really cool if we could better represent the children's brand colors in here. So let's go and look at that documentation again in Storybook and find out, who do we need to talk to about adding or changing the way that those colors are in the system. So we can see from our kind of strong ownership that we've got here that we need to maybe go and speak to either the homepage or topics team or both. And we've got that wonderful community of people and all of those Slack channels that we onboarded with earlier that we can go and talk to them through. Even better, every single team in the system has their own team page, also in Storybook, so you can go and see not only where to contact them, but also what other things they might maintain and any components that they're using from the other teams as well. So we've got this really interesting kind of mapped out dependencies that you can go and look at and understand where everyone's kind of connecting with each other. Ooh, lovely embarrassing stock photo. We love that. So let's go and speak to the topics team and have a bit of a meeting with them and talk to them about our requirements, so that how we want to add our branding into this big billboard, right? So they use it already, and actually it turns out they'd like to do something really similar. They'd like to do the same thing, but for their brands that they might be supporting. So big one, Doctor Who, we've got this like big topics page, right? And they'd really like to be able to use that, branding from the show and the images from the show and apply that to that billboard component. So really important that we have that mandatory ownership in place to be able to start these conversations. Every single component that is built in this system is owned, and that ownership is clearly surfaced. It's also codified in the repository. So if you don't have your files in our code owners, it's not going to let you merge them in. It's going to tell that you need to put a team in. It's a GitHub Teams that we use to do this. In there somewhere, so that folks know who they need to be talking to. And that's really, really important, that you don't end up with a bunch of orphaned components somewhere that folks would like to maybe use, but they don't know who owns it, who uses it. Having all that information available to us helps them understand the kind of state of the system and the components that they might want to reuse. Open collaboration from other contributors is really important. So the reason that we ask everything kind of goes in the design system is because even if it isn't shared right now, it could be shared later. And someone can come along and they have all that documentation available and they can understand if it's going to work for them. So once more into those shoes. Okay, so the thing with CBBC and the thing with CBeebies is that they have a lot of sub-brands, right? They've got a lot of shows, they've got a lot of kind of campaigns that they're doing. So CBBC alone has 235 sub-brands that they work with. that's a lot of sub-brands. Topics probably have a similar amount considering all of the various things that they cover. CBVC is a little less, with about 174, but that's still a hecton, right? So what are we going to do here? We're going to add 235 levers to the design system because that seems quite difficult to maintain. And how are we also going to make sure that all of those meet the accessibility and scalability and maintainability requirements of the system? That sounds really difficult. So we should probably go to speak to the design system team about this, right? Because we're talking about introducing new colors and brands and stuff to the system. Speaking to them, they are concerned about the maintainability of adding so many hex codes to the system. And imagine having that drop down of levers, and instead of 10 kind of like tidy brands, it's like 200 odd things that you have to scroll through. That would be pretty wild. So yeah, they're making a sort of face at this. But it's really easy to contact them, and it's really easy to set up meetings with them, and the community kind of come in, and we bring topics in as well. So let's have a conversation about how we can do this. So to avoid all of that maintenance and make sure that you can reuse this stuff across more things than just children's in the future, perhaps, how about we shift our thinking into tooling here? Can we be a little bit more creative about the way that we come up with a solution that meets the requirements of the team that we're in and the thing that we're trying to achieve, but also meets the requirements of the system and what the business would like from us, right? Which is not having to have a whole team of people looking after just 250 brands, which would be a lot. So the design system team are a bunch of amazing, very, very clever folks. And they came up with the concept of something called the color picker. So the color picker ended up being a reusable component that wraps around other components that kind of overrides that initial page levers theme in an isolated kind of space. And it allows our editorial staff to choose an image that represents the brand that they're trying to show to the audience well. And then we have this color picking library that goes in and it picks out colors from that image. Right, so we're kind of doing this on the fly now. So we're not adding like, the blue hex background there or anything like that to the system, but we are allowing people to inject that brand in without kind of polluting that wider system. So as children's, once we've introduced this tool, let's go and have a look. No, that looks a bit better, doesn't it? We've got that nice bright green that's kind of the highest population color from the background. And what you'll notice as well is that between those two, the text color is flipped. And that's because the color picker not only goes and picks those bright, those colors out of that image, it also makes sure that any text that you put on top of that gradient of background is automatically accessible, right? So one of the things that we find challenging sometimes is if our editorial staff are making decisions about colors, sometimes they're not aware of accessibility standards, and it's quite hard to kind of bridge that communication and skills gap sometimes. So we wanted to make it as easy and as kind of automatic as possible and as safe as possible when they're kind of choosing these colors. And then topics have been able to use it too. So Doctor Who looking very nice there with that purple. We love that. So yeah, we're picking those colors out. And this is actually reusing that tool that has now been collaboratively created, but across another component. So this is actually a slightly different component called the topic header. And so they've kind of taken that from that collaboration and used it in their own space for their own benefit. And they didn't even have to ask for it. Another team made it. Another team did met their requirements, and now they're able to reuse it in other places, which is awesome. So we're really taking that collaborative community gardening approach. So if someone comes along and they're like, yeah, I'm going to come into the shared community garden and I'm going to plant a gigantic oak tree right in the middle, you might sort of be a bit like, that sounds awesome, but maybe, hear me out, we choose a birch tree instead and we pop it over here so that it doesn't interfere with all the other things in the garden that everyone else has put in there, and it's not taking all the nutrients away, right? So we do a similar kind of thing with the design system team. They go out and they speak to the teams that are building on the platform, but we're not looking to block people. We're not trying to police them. We're trying to help them meet their requirements, but also keep that system successful and tidy and maintainable so that we don't don't have to linearly scale the design system team with like the amount of stuff in the system, right? So we're really leveraging all of our kind of tooling and that community to maximize the amount of scale that we can achieve, but without having to put tons and tons and tons of resource into that team and to maintaining that system. And then where the system can be impacted by the things that, editorial are asking for or the teams are asking for, can we get super creative and really think about how we can scale, but without having 235 levers in the system, perhaps. So just to recap what we've been through there. So we've got our flexible entry points on onboarding. So we knew exactly what the design system was about, what they were trying to achieve. We could see all of the tooling, the visualization, which is awesome. All of that documentation around the components is super automated. And it's always there, right? So in every component, you know what to expect, and you know if something's missing as well. So you can kind of go in, and if you really wanted to use something and maybe the accessibility documentation isn't as good as you think it could be, you can go in, you can find those files, you can update it, you can edit it, and then you can kind of chat with the team who maybe created it to begin with. And generally speaking, people are super happy to have those contributions from other areas of the business. Mandatory ownership, right? This is super, super important. You don't want components that are orphans. You don't want components that no one knows who they need to speak to, if they want to update it or change it, or if they want to kind of add something in. That code owners also allows us to have this kind of really nice system where people can just like raise PRs against your stuff, and you'll just get a little notification to go, hey, can you have a quick look at this thing? We've just added a new prop to your component for our needs. Have a quick chat about it, and that's all good. And yeah, that really collaborative community and like gardening approach, right? Again, we're not trying to block you. We want to help you meet your requirements in the teams, but also meet the needs of the business and the design system itself. So hopefully, if we follow some of these tips and advice, your design systems will end up in a better condition than my garden and my garden fence, which is going to be very expensive, as I say, for me to fix later on this year. I'll have to rip everything out all at once, and I will have to talk to the neighbors about it. Amazing. So I just want to call out, before I finish up, the actual BBC Web Design System team themselves. I did get some permission to use their first names here, but they are an incredible group of people, specifically on the color picker work. We had Nat there, and Sam did a lot of work around that, collaborating with the teams that were looking for that solution. But everyone on this team is absolutely incredible, and I really wanted to give them credit for the work that they've done here, because I just have the absolute joy of kind of gently guiding, steering, and managing those people, that they are intensely clever. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thanks so much, Sophie. That was a fantastic talk. It's great to hear about the complexity of the BBC design systems and the ways that the problems and issues have been addressed in such creative ways. We have time for questions, so if anybody would like to share, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm curious about the team composition. So you have people, so do they specialize in like web engineering and more UX and
Sure, so the design system
like?
team?
Yeah.
So it is a cross-discipline team, right? So we've got kind of like the full gamut of disciplines in there. We have product, we have delivery, we have 3 UXers in that team, because it is quite a UX kind of and design and branding heavy kind of area. A lot of the time they are, so I don't know if you might not have heard of it, that's totally fine, but in the BBC we have something called GEL, which is the Global Experience Language, which is kind of like the overarching branding decisions that get made for the kind of whole organization. And a lot of the UXers in the design system team have worked in that space. So they can really push that kind of like branding stuff through the advice that they give through that team as well. But yeah, and then there's also, I think there's right now 4 or 5 engineers, web engineers in there. So yeah, we've got Josh, for example, who represents the BBC at the CSS working group. So yeah, lots of involvement in that design system and web space from the engineers as well. So yeah, they are the design system experts in the BBC at the moment.
Thank you very much, Sophie. That's amazing. I have a question. I have two questions, by the way. How old is the design system?
Yeah.
And the second question is, how do you, from the business side, how do you have a dashboard of KPIs? How do you measure the outcomes behind the design systems?
Sorry, so just that last sentence again?
The outcomes, the ROI of the design systems, how do you measure that for business people?
Yeah, that makes sense. So the design system that we have is about 5 years old now. So yeah, it has very slowly grown. So we didn't just go straight in with that like quality of documentation from the beginning. It's definitely been a build-up of that tooling. In terms of kind of making it valuable to the business, I think, again, recently we've been doing a lot of surfacing of data around the system itself to the rest of the business, and we are going to continue doing that. We're now kind of like out the other side of that design system kind of spectrum, right? So you start at the beginning and you're a bit like, oh, we just really want everyone to use our stuff, right? And please use our stuff. For us, that wasn't as much of an issue because everyone that was building on WebCore, which is that kind of central web platform, were building on the design system. So we kind of like, they were a bit of a captive audience, honestly. We're kind of like, yeah, all your stuff in the system. We love that. But now we're in a position where more and more people want to use it and more teams want to use it and contribute to it. And we're kind of on the opposite side of that scaling. And I think that's where like that data visualization starts getting really useful so that we can start showing like which teams are like maintaining or creating the most components and which ones are just reusing everything and not maybe maintaining as much, right? I think we've got some interesting ownership challenges in our future because now we've been around for like 5 years or so. We're starting to get that thing where you get like natural churn in a company, right? So teams move on to other things. Okay, cool. They own like 5 components. What are we going to do with that, right? So some more interesting stuff around it, and that data visualization is going to help us make those decisions and be able to kind of show the rest of the business the value that we have and where it's going to sit as well. So yeah, I think all of that documentation really helps as well to kind of show every discipline. It's not just for engineers. It's not just for kind of our designers. The kind of product side, you know, they can come in and like have a look at what's in the system, you know, and play around with it themselves if they want to. It's that easy to use and understand.
Hi, thank you. How do you manage the A/B test and the experimental version?
Sorry, can you say that again?
How do you manage the A/B test and the experimental version of the same component?
Experiments, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so at the moment, experimentation is very much a collaborative effort. And it's something, again, that we're looking at creating better tooling for. At the moment, it really is kind of going in, speaking to the people who currently own that component and making sure that when you're doing the kind of experimental work in those spaces, that it's not like super interfering with like some plans that they have in their roadmap, which definitely could be better. So that's, yeah, experimentation is one of the big challenges of having that unversioned system, right? That you can't just kind of like version a component off to the side and kind of do some stuff with it. But equally, it also means that, you know, if we had a kind of accessibility complaint not too long back where someone mentioned that we weren't using headings on the indexes, we were using links, which semantically makes sense, but for our audience purposes needing to browse things on those index pages, the research that we ended up doing for that showed us that we should kind of be using headings everywhere. And because of that unversioned state that we've got in the system, we could just update the promo to use a heading and it fixed it across the entire website all at once, which is really nice. But it is a very wide kind of like blast radius, if you will, for like change, right? So yeah, I think experimentation is something that we are trying to do more of. And I think in the future we'll be looking at introducing some more tooling around that and to make it much easier to do it rather than kind of going in on the components that are kind of live on the site right now and putting all of your experiments in there when they might maybe clash with each other.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. I love the garden analogy. Brilliant. So as a core team with lots of other teams depending on you, how do you balance any requirements that emerge from these teams? How do you manage? What's the priority?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when folks approach the design system team with a support request, they have the ability to kind of fill out a support. We've got a bot that they can kind of use to fill out a support request. And one of the things that we ask in there is this blocking you? And, you know, how much of a priority is this, right? Is this like, it's mission critical that we need to introduce this thing? And sometimes we have conversations with those teams and we go, do you know what? We'd really like to do something that's super reusable and we have a plan for that. But if you've got a deadline for like the election next week, obviously we can facilitate a sort of tactical solution in the moment. And then we'll revisit it with the design system team kind of advising on that and how to recontribute that to the system again. But we do have the ability for folks to kind of take those components, if they really need to, into their own what we call like container space. So it's not as much in the reusable kind of component space. It's almost like their little kind of bit that they can kind of do what they want with if they really need to. So there is an avenue for people to kind of pull the cord and be a bit like, no, we really need to get this in here right now and we can't be super reusable just yet, and that's totally fine. But yeah, we handle support requests and prioritizing them by kind of talking to the teams about that. We do also have things that the design system team are trying to do themselves, right? So the tooling that we saw, that's all kind of like their own roadmap work. And yeah, it's really balancing the support requests with the kind of day-to-day kind of BAU that we're trying to do as well. And that can be tough sometimes, but that is kind of like the nature of being an enabling team, right? Is you do a lot of kind of outreach and talking to people. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Any experience? I understood that the design system was mainly web and React. Any experience in integrating mobile native components or other technologies?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So actually, we kind of, the web design system was the first one that we kind of did, a team that we created around that. And then maybe, I'm going to say like a year and a bit ago, probably 2 years now, we did actually spin up a mobile design system, an app design system team, very similarly because of the success of the original web design system, which is really cool. So yeah, at the moment, the way that we're going to be doing it is having separate design systems for those kind of spaces. And we very recently moved the organization kind of like more around those like modes of people accessing the BBC. So yeah, we're going to have a whole team for the app side and TV side, which is really cool.
Hey, we can see it's amazing how you've made that work for the overall sort of page, the layout. Does the design system also include mechanisms for people who are telling visual stories? If we take the news, for example, maybe you've got charts or maps or visual storytelling as part of the pages themselves. And if so, what does that mean for an unversioned design system? Like, do you have like this massively increasing scale on your chromatic diffs that look back over historic stories, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of our, what we would call visual journalism, right? So if you go into articles and you see like the charts and stuff that get created are coming from third parties. So we do work with a lot of partners to create those graphics, but we do include them kind of like in Storybook. What we'll generally do is we'll say, you know, we don't need a screenshot for every permutation of like the way that the graph looks. That's not really what we're kind of trying to test there. We're just trying to make sure that all of the main elements of that embed, for example, are kind of in the right place. So we probably wouldn't, in our case, kind of have very many snapshots, if you will, around that. So yeah, just a few to make sure that the embed works correctly. But hey, who knows? Maybe in the future we'll need to cross that bridge.
Thank you. Going off a couple of questions ago, I'm just wondering if you hope to integrate the web design system and mobile design system at some point, and do you have a strategy for that, or is it separate for the time being and will continue to be?
It's separate for the time being, and the plan is to, I think, keep them separate for now. I think because there are things that you can definitely share in terms of standard of documentation, things like accessibility importance. We really want that to be shared across those areas. But the implementation details are so different for the mobile space to the web space, and especially TV as well. So we do a lot of the like TV apps, even though that's web technically. There's like hundreds of versions of TVs. I was on a graduate scheme with the BBC, and one of the teams I worked with at that point was the IPTV team, our area, and yeah, I still remember like testing all of our stuff on such a massive range of TVs with the very different support capabilities. So yeah, I think for now it's probably going to remain separate, but we will continue to share kind of like principles between those two spaces, because there's a lot of underlying foundations that work kind of regardless of your mode of access.
Yeah, just one more.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you for the brilliant talk, and thank you for the reference to Bluey. I'm a huge fan myself.
Very good, I'm glad.
I have a question about the accessibility. So how do you assess the accessibility of your components, particularly when it comes to screen reader behavior?
Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to accessibility, I didn't mention it in the talk, but I'm happy to like chat about it a little bit later. We use Axe in our CI/CD pipeline, right? So we've got that embedded in there, and it runs against a kind of representative subset of routes every time the build happens, and flags up any new kind of like problems that have arisen there. We do also have so Storybook has a kind of like accessibility tab for a particular component, because component level and page level accessibility are quite different. In terms of the screen reader stuff, that comes in with the accessibility swarms that we ask people to complete. So that part is still quite manual, but I think it's really useful for teams to be going in and just giving it a go with, like the screen reader on their Mac, for example. So the whole team will get together around a feature that they've created and go through this swarm kind of template that we've created. It's still in Dropbox paper. I'm hoping to maybe do a bit more tooling around that to make it even easier to do that in the future. But yeah, we go through a kind of like standard checklist of accessibility checks to make, and then also a little bit of, can you get through the headings? Can you get through your landmarks properly? Are the semantics correct on the page? And just getting people to think about it up front, really. Definitely progress over perfection when it comes to the accessibility side, because yeah, the scale is absolutely massive, and not every team has the same kind of accessibility skill level as others, and that's perfectly fine. And they can always come to the design system team, in which we've got folks with accessibility expertise as well, so they can help out with that.
Thank you all so much. Give a huge round of applause to Sophie.